I'm delighted to be here with you all, and I think it's a particularly important time to be here. I was sharing with some of our colleagues last night that I got off a plane yesterday evening from New York City, where I was participating in some of the events of Clinton Global Initiative and UN General Assembly Week. And the focus at all those events is around the Millennium Development Goals and what we've achieved against those goals that were set out for 2015. And then where we're going from here. What are we going to set forth as the next goals, what they're calling the Sustainable Development Goals. And someone said to me, well, I'm so glad you would leave that and come here. That's sort of amazing. Honestly, to me, this is a far more important room to be in than any of the events that I spent the earlier part of the week in. Because while there was so much talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and how partnership with the private sector has to be at the front and center of that conversation, and that's really important that they're finally getting there to understand this role. The reality is most of the people in those rooms don't really know how to do this. So we're delighted to be with a group of people that are invested in partnership and that really do want to see what's the good we can take from the private sector to contribute to a better world. So with that, let me move forward. I'm going to appreciate Alicia's assistance. I am not a technology adopter, so she keeps throwing new fun technologies at me, and she's going to click for me because I cannot click and speak at the same time. And I'm also one of the non-German speakers here, so I'm limited on all kinds of fronts this morning. So let's go ahead and take a look at what is Global Pro Bono. First of all, let's define this clearly as Global Pro Bono is about skills-based assignments. And that's very distinct from traditional community service. Reinhard laid it out really nicely in his slide that there's a spectrum of ways you can involve. But we really want to talk today about the skills-based piece. I also want to mention that we are talking about Global Pro Bono when we come from the PYXERA Global perspective. So there's lots of local pro bono work that's going on and delivering real value to communities, but we want to talk about the programs in this session that are crossing borders to make a difference. And we want to talk about those programs because they do have a different flavor to them, they do have a different level of complexity to them, and we've been investing in really understanding what that complexity looks like over the past few years. At PYXERA Global, we're especially focused on the power of cross-border programs to change the way that companies operate, to accelerate leadership development of high-potential employees, and to maximize the social impact of CSR programs. We're talking about contributing talent and expertise of employees who cross borders to support the work of the public sector, the social sector, and even the private sector at times, whether it's supporting social enterprises or the growth of small business and enterprises in the case of SAP's program. These are programs that we talk about using the terminology purposeful global engagement. This is something that goes beyond checkbook philanthropy, and it's really engaging the hearts and minds of employees to drive social impact. So we've been carefully following how this area has developed since 2006, when we first became involved in corporate pro bono programs. We worked on skills-based volunteer programs for our entire history of 25 years. But we started engaging in this corporate pro bono space back in 2006, or back in 2009, but we looked at the evolution of this since 2006. We held our first conference in Global Pro Bono back in 2009, and we also conducted our first benchmarking study. So the guts of my comments today are going to be focused on what we learned in this benchmarking study, what's been going on for the last 5 years, and the growth of this space. One thing that we have noticed is that there are 3 clear themes that have come forward: leadership development, innovation, and impact. So let's look first at leadership development. These programs have always been about developing leadership competencies. Increasingly, we're seeing that the leadership sweet spot they hit is in improving adaptability of employees and the ability of already strong performers to learn from their environment and to take the opportunity to be a pathfinder. This particular picture comes from a PepsiCo team that was working with Heifer International in South Africa. And one of the components of the project was to work with some local farmers on possibly using beekeeping as a source of income generation. The assignment was to see whether it made sense to create a beekeepers association. But something important about this project is this request didn't come from the farmers. This was a feasibility study that was done that said beekeeping might be good. So how do you then take a situation like this, understand what the farmers know and what their real potential is to work in the beekeeping space, and see whether the feasibility study was really all that practical in the end. So none of the farmers knew anything about honey production. And the PepsiCo participant, Mike, who also knew nothing about bees. We've got farmers that know nothing about bees. We've got consultants that know nothing about bees. So what can they do together here? Well, he took it upon himself to become a bee expert. By the end of the 4 weeks in country, he had worked with the farmers to create that Beekeepers Association and had created a tool for a local NGO to assess the region for additional beekeeping activities. How does this kind of assignment relate to leadership development? Well, in today's economy, we must all learn to some extent to be beekeepers, to learn a completely new skill from scratch, and to work with others to develop an approach to make it work. Global Pro Bono provides the space for this to happen, as participating employees are removed from their comfort zone and challenged to stretch their soft and hard skills. Another aspect of Global Pro Bono that's been apparent from the beginning is that it indeed proves that necessity is the mother of invention or innovation, and that when faced with a challenge, a group of smart people will figure out how to overcome it. I was lucky enough to go out with the first IBM group to Ghana. This was the first Global Pro Bono program that we worked with. And we had intentionally put the participants in a small guest house in Kumasi that had no internet connectivity. Intentionally, because we wanted them to learn to interact the way that the folks in Kumasi would, which means they would go down to an internet cafe if they wanted to get online. But the reality was we underestimated the value of connectivity, particularly for a group of IBM employees. And within a week of our being there, these guys had figured out how to wire the whole guest house for internet. Now at the time, there were 2 hotels in Kumasi that actually had internet access. And you can imagine, I nearly had a heart attack when I looked up and one of the IBMers had climbed a water tower in the yard of this guest house to place the equipment. But it was a wonderful project. It got them the connectivity they wanted, and now this guest house became only the 3rd place in Kumasi that actually was providing internet access to its guests. They didn't even know they had a problem, the guest house, but all of a sudden they had a great value add. And that was a side project. That's not what the IBMers were set out to do. They did this in addition to working with NGOs and local governments. Finally, I want to talk about impact. So SAP has taken on a program in Porto Alegre in Brazil, where they actually sent 2 successive teams to work with this local government. The project was centered around a municipal system that allows citizens to report concerns and problems so that the government can address them as quickly as possible. The team went in and evaluated the user experience. How easy was it for people to report these problems? And then they also looked at what was happening once these problems got reported. They found that the system wasn't fully integrated with the departments and the requests weren't being tracked. Solutions were delayed extensively and they were getting lost internally. And the first team focused on a couple of these services, including fallen trees and reports of floods, and they created process maps and gave recommendations. A second team came about 5 months later and looked at what had actually been done in terms of implementing them. So it's great to give people a plan and process improvement, but how do you go about ensuring then that that plan gets implemented? Having a second team come in and look, now that we have the theory, how do we put this into practice, was key to moving this program forward and to helping the Porto Alegre government understand how it was going to improve the lives of its 1.5 million citizens. And so many of those recommendations that were made are now being put into action that may not have happened as quickly with without the second team coming along. So that's one of the things we're learning, that is that if we want to talk about sustainable change, that it sometimes takes more than just one interaction to get there. So Global Pro Bonos enable change to happen in multiple directions. The change happens with the participants who are provided with a new perspective, who are encouraged to stretch their talents, and whom we hope are taking in a bit of the culture that they are embedded in for these time periods. For local clients, it's not just access to the skills that they might not otherwise have access to, but what we hear over and over again from the local organizations that, yes, it was valuable, the process that was delivered. Yes, it was valuable that they helped us create a fundraising strategy. Yes, it was valuable in the case of Porto Alegre that they looked at where our systems weren't integrated and gave us some solutions on that. But equally as important was seeing the way these teams thought about process and about systems. And we took as much away from being able to be part of that process of thinking as we took away from the actual solution. And that's a hugely important point that I'm going to come back to in a little while, but I think it's one that gets overlooked a lot. What's being delivered beyond just the solution to these host organizations? We all know that stories and testimonials are great. We've heard a few of them so far, and we know that a focus on process is critical, because I just said it. But it's critical for mutual beneficial impact, but we also want to see the numbers to back it up, and we actually have good numbers to back this up. We undertook this benchmark this year from January to March, which is the period that we do it every year. And what we found out during this time, we are pretty confident in our numbers that there are about 39 companies in the world that have a global pro bono program of any size, just 39. And what we were able to gather data from 26 of those companies. So 26 responded to our survey. So we've got some pretty good information to share with you. What we know is that global pro bono is still relatively new. Even the oldest programs are only about 10 years old. GSK being one of those that is about 8 years old. Pfizer being a program that's 10 years old. There's not a lot that goes, there's nothing we know of that goes back beyond that. We know from our survey that over 9,000 people will have participated in a program by the end of this year. 9,000 total people over that 10-year period of time. Now that's about 2,000 more than had participated when we counted back in 2013. So 2,000 is a pretty big jump over 1 year given that the length that we've been tracking this for. In 2006, the first year for which we have numbers, there were global pro bono programs in just 5 countries. By 2013, the total number of countries that had received at least one global pro bono team was 80. So it jumped from 5 countries to 80 countries in just that short period of time, in that 5-year period of time. Participating employees have been recruited from about 50 countries. And since we're talking about international corporate volunteer programs, this might not seem that surprising, but it's also an important element. In addition to the social and business impact of these programs, they also represent a really important form of citizen diplomacy. We talk a lot about how the internet has created a global world, but the reality is that connections are made by human-to-human contact, and that's really strengthened when folks are working together across borders and across nationalities in another country, trying to find solutions together. One thing we've also learned from our research is that the teaming element is extremely important for most of the sponsoring companies. The ability to successfully operate in a group that's composed not only of Americans, but Germans and Brazilians and Chinese and Egyptians is how global success is achieved today. Nearly 90% of these programs have at least some sort of team-based component, and 75% of these teams have at least 6 people on them. So you're getting the cross-cultural experience by being in another country, you're getting the cross-cultural experience by working with colleagues from other countries, and you're also getting this cross-functional experience when you have at least 6 people on a team representing different areas of your company. So we know most programs consist of teams and they're increasingly made up of international cohorts, but what do they do and how long do they do it for? The average project length amongst all of the companies that responded to our survey is 4 weeks. This seems to be a special place that people have agreed upon that is long enough to get an immersive experience. It's long enough to understand the challenges of operating in the environment that you're working in, and it's long enough to have a real deliverable for your host client. But it's not so long to be away from your day job and to be away from your family. Now, while 4 weeks is the sweet spot, we also do know of companies that have week-long programs that are very successful. And there are companies that have longer fellowship-type programs that go from 3 to 6 months. So there's lots of ways to cut this pie and still have a very successful program as long as it's well designed. We're also seeing an increase in virtual or combination virtual and in-person programs. While some of the benefits of the more traditional programs might be missed, the more immersive programs, the virtual aspect does open them up to employees who might not otherwise be able to participate. So for the first time this year, we asked respondents if their program had a topic or theme it was developed to address. We never really knew what people were grouping their programs around, aside from the dozen or so companies that we work with. And what we learned was that microfinance came out at the very top along with healthcare. So 18% on microfinance and 17% on healthcare. But then the other theme areas were across the board. There's a smattering, a little bit of everything in here, from women's empowerment to entrepreneurship to community development, healthy lifestyles, clean and safe water came up several times. So every company is making this its own, in part through the theme of the program. A full 85% of the companies work with an implementing partner to operationalize or to facilitate at least a portion of their program. And more than half of the programs have less than one full-time employee working on it. There are a few notable exceptions to that. GSK is one company that actually handles their program fully in-house. But most of the companies, no matter how large their program is, have just very few people that are supporting it. And I think SAP, I see Alexandra nodding back there. Yes, there are too few of us supporting this. One of the more interesting trends highlighted in this survey was the growing interest in partnering with other corporations. So 75% of the companies that responded have interest in working on programs with other corporations. And it's been interesting for us to see how this has evolved over the years. In 2010, 2011, we managed a couple of cross-company programs, but really it was companies going to the same place at the same time and living in the same location, but not solving the same problem together. They were working on parallel projects. For the first time in 2013, we saw companies start to actively collaborate, where Citibank and IBM would go together to work with a municipality in Brazil on solving a challenge that built on the skills of Citibank as well as the skills of IBM. And I think this is one of the most exciting things that's going on in this space, is how do we start to draw this together. And I see Amanda nodding, because we have been working for years to try to get companies to really look at how they can collaborate and bring the best of the skills of multiple companies to address different aspects of the same challenge. I think that if we can crack this nut, if we can figure out how to get companies to collaborate better, we really can start to move the needle on some of the biggest global challenges that we're facing today. So as great a potential as the future might hold, we need to show impact today as we continue to grow the practice. We need to measure, we need to capture, we need to report on impact. We break impact into 3 broad categories, which you see here. Impact on the employee, impact on the business, and the social impact. With just very few exceptions, these programs always have an employee development component. 69% of companies listed leadership development as the most important aspect of their program with regards to employee impact. And this was followed by cultural adaptability, professional skills, and team building. From the participating employee's perspective, the ability to use their professional skills in a new way takes the top spot at 22%, followed again by cross-cultural adaptability, the ability to broaden their network within the company. So this opens up new professional opportunities internally for people, they felt. Global pro bono programs break down not only the barriers of international borders, they also break down the silos that naturally develop across functions in a business. From a business impact side, the picture is a bit less clear, and this makes sense. Measuring causality to bottom line impact is a real challenge. However, gaining a better understanding of opportunities and challenges in emerging markets was the clear winner of the options on this question. From the CSR perspective, global pro bono programs are seen as having a substantial impact on local communities, and they provide a way to engage employees in overall CSR strategy. Now, capturing this impact is really difficult. Testimonials remain the way most companies are capturing both social and business impact. This is a real growth opportunity for this sector. How are we going to do better impact measurement? How are we going to capture it? How are we going to analyze? How are we going to report on it? How are we going to disseminate this information? Now I want to move on. This comes from our benchmark. The next pieces of data that I'm going to provide to you actually come from a survey that IBM did of its employees. And some of you may know that IBM has the largest pro bono, global pro bono efforts going on to date. And they've already sent over 3,000 people over the last 6 or 7 years on their programs. And so when they had sent 2,500 people, they actually did a survey of all of the people who had participated and then of the managers of the people who had participated. And this is what they learned. When they asked the participants, 97% would recommend the experience to a colleague for the purposes of leadership development. 88% reported an increased ability to listen for and understand clients' needs. And that's a critical success factor given IBM's business. 90% reported a better understanding of business's role in society. Now that's a good thing for IBM, but that's a great thing for the world. We'd like a lot more people that understand the role of business in society. So that's self-reported change. And we all feel good when we've gone through this kind of experience and we all check the boxes. But what did the managers say? Not just immediately when people got back that had done the program in 2013, but what about those folks that went in 2009? All managers across all years of the program were asked. And what they said was 92% of managers said that those who participated had enhanced their cultural awareness. And IBM had set that out as a key soft skill that was critical to their future leaders. 73% of managers said they noticed better leadership skills as a direct result of this 4-week assignment. And an impressive 78% of managers reported improved attitude and motivation post-corporate service score. That's a very nice statistic, I'm sure, to be able to share with the CEO. And not on this slide, but another very important statistic is that 76% of those who participated in IBM's global pro bono programs reported that they were far more likely to stay with IBM for the long term as a direct result of their assignment. So in today's battle for talent across the globe, that certainly is a success that money can't buy. So moving on from IBM, I wanted to share that because it was such a big and long data pool. But just going back to the broader survey pool, we know there are challenges in capturing impact, but we know these programs are a success. 89% of responding companies were extremely or very pleased with their programs and thought they were successful in meeting their stated objectives. When asked what they thought their keys to success were, these were the following things that emerged. Tie the program to the strategic objectives of the company. And that again speaks to the slide you saw where we said, gosh, there's 20 different things people are doing with those programs. That's because they are tying them to the strategic objectives. Make sure you tell your story well, both internally and externally. This is starting to happen more now. In the early days, I think most companies were a little more shy about sharing their story. I think there was a level of discomfort with saying that the company was getting something out of this in addition to delivering social impact. There's starting to be a much greater deal of comfort with that, and I think that that's a very good thing. Ensure that you have senior leadership support. 75% of the programs that responded have visibility at the CEO level. And be flexible and oriented towards your host client's need. And that's a really important one, and I'm sure I'll say it again because I say it a lot, but giving what's needed versus what you want to give is really important to the impact of these programs. So now we know what the companies are doing, we know why and how and what the impact on the companies is. I want to go back for a moment to the issue of process, because I really love process. The social impact of process, because both companies and participants planning for a global pro bono experience sometimes underestimate the importance of this. In fact, we've advised a number of companies who were initially more interested in a traditional service program than in a skills-based program. And each time we advised against going with a solely service model because of impact on the participants, on the companies, and on the host clients. And at the same time, we understand there's types of work that feel more like helping, that tug more at the heartstrings. When we look at charitable activities around the globe, we find, and the way that fundraising is done, it's so often about help. And the pictures are of a mother that's going to be able to feed her child because you helped. And it feels really good to be part of that. And it's important, charity is important, and philanthropy is important. It's important that there are organizations that fill those immediate humanitarian needs. But when we talk about global pro bono, we are really moving away from this idea of we are here to help you. And we're trying to move to a sense of we're providing services that enable people and organizations to succeed. It may feel like semantics to some extent, but I think it's a really important and different way to think about the work that we're doing. And that there's a challenge there in ensuring that we can all find that concept equally satisfying and that we can feel as good about it. The challenge to find process improvement fulfilling and to recognize that programs focused in this way deliver greater benefits to all who are involved, the host organizations, the companies, and the volunteers. Someone who has spent 2 decades working on women's empowerment issues around the globe said this to me in the course of another meeting: process is the root of all social change. It was just a throwaway in the conversation when I was talking to her, but it really, really stuck in my mind. Process and systems, this is exactly why global pro bono is so important and can be so effective. So let me take you back to a live example of what process change can do. The next few images are from a client, SustainTech in India. And SustainTech is a social enterprise that makes clean cook stoves for commercial usage. I don't know how many of you know anything about clean cook stoves, but they've received a great deal of attention over the last few years because of the very negative effects on health and environment that traditional cook stoves have. The cook stoves used for commercial purposes, however, have been largely left out of this mini revolution around clean cook stoves. And SustainTech's founder saw that gap and stepped in to create an affordable and clean product that is specifically focused for commercial use. Over the years, designs like the traditional mud stove, which is what you see here, have changed little, and that's reflected in their performance. The Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves estimates there are 170 million household cook stoves in India alone. Now, there's only 10 million commercial cook stoves in India, and that may pale in comparison, but commercial cook stoves run 8 to 10 hours a day and at a much higher fuel consumption rate. They estimate that the environmental impact of a commercial cook stove is about 10 times that of a household stove. So if you could take those 10 million commercial cook stoves off the market, it would have the same impact of removing 100 million traditional cook stoves from private homes. So SustainTech stoves cut fuel consumption of these commercial stoves by 40 to 50%, and this is the SustainTech stove model. It significantly reduces demand on forest resources, and those resources are going to become more stressed as India's population continues to grow. SustainTech is a great story of impact because actually several different global pro bono teams went to work with SustainTech on different aspects of the challenges that they face, and also a long-term MBA fellow went for 6 months to work with them. So they had the benefit of different levels, different skill sets, and also of an ongoing assistance. Over a period of 3 years, these various teams at MBA worked with SustainTech to make their business processes more robust, to institutionalize the standard processes, and to improve information flow with the goal of creating a more scalable organization. The more robust processes have allowed more decisions to be made at a lower level and reduced the need for management attention, while allowing decisions to be made faster so the company can be more responsive to the customer needs. Better information flow allowed also these efforts to begin to transform SustainTech into a company capable of scale that can reach all of the underserved business customers, that can start to address that need for 10 million commercial cook stoves instead of just the few thousand that they were able to produce previously. Produce and market. Marketing was part of their big challenge as well. But SustainTech's been very clear that the founder of SustainTech's been very clear she never could have hoped to make this kind of impact without the process and system skills that the pro bono consultants brought to the table. This is also one of our favorite examples because a team from Dow Corning was there working, I believe, on marketing, Laura. Mm-hmm. So working on some of the marketing issues. And one thing that Dow Corning did was they invited the participants to share back with folks in Midland, Michigan who couldn't be part of the team what was going on in the field. And while they were addressing marketing, they noticed a production problem, or they were told about a production problem that the company had been facing. And someone had blogged about it on the internal Dow Corning blog, and a bunch of welders back in Midland, Michigan were reading the blog. And they said, oh, we know how to solve that issue. And they blogged back and said, this is what they need to do. So in addition to the marketing solution, Dow Corning was able to tap into the folks that were back home that had some technical skills and bring those skills to solve the problem. So there's just so many levels of richness to the impact that a program can have, and I think Sustain Tech just exemplifies all of these. So we know these programs are terrific. I've said that several times. I think all of you who have programs believe it absolutely. We have empirical and anecdotal evidence to back that up. But it seems to take a lot of courage to embark upon a global pro bono program, we gotta get an easier word, of any size. One way you can certainly tell it takes courage to do this type of global pro bono work can be seen in this room and in the benchmark study. Cross-sector partners have developed a proven model that drives both business and social value. It's a gold standard shared value model. And yet, as I exposed earlier, there's still only 39 companies doing this work at any scale. And that's just not enough. 26 companies answered our survey, and the 2,000 people they're dedicating is just not enough. Even if we assume those 13 companies who didn't respond have comparable programs, we're still only to maybe 3,000 people a year. It's not enough to affect change within corporations, and it's not enough to really move the needle on complex global challenges like poverty, global health, the environment, access to water, technology, and education. And this cartoon, I realize it's small here, so I'm gonna tell you exactly what it says, but I thought it kind of told the story of where we are. 20 years ago, we committed ourselves to eradicating world poverty and hunger. Since that time, we've vigorously promoted our policies of free trade, export-led economies, trickle-down, and structural adjustment. However, in the meantime, the gap between rich and poor has done nothing but widen. And so 20 years hence, what is now needed is obvious. Another 20 years of the same. Sounds familiar. This scenario is not limited just to poverty and hunger, but also health and environment and pretty much every other large-scale challenge you can imagine. I believe we have a responsibility to not do more of the same. And I'm guessing that if you're in this room, you share this sentiment. I believe global pro bono is already different, and it has the potential to do much more. We no longer talk about the work we do at PYXERA Global with and through our partners, like those in this room, as development. I told you already, we talk about that work as purposeful global engagement. If development is something you do to someone or something, in purposeful engagement, we're doing something with someone. We're engaging together with a mutually beneficial purpose. In the case of SAP, Dow, IBM, Pfizer, Merck, and others, PYXERA Global identifies host organizations and conducts participatory needs assessments. We don't assume we know their needs and what is right. We listen and we co-create a scope of work and match the skill sets of our private sector partners who go on to co-create solutions. In the case of all global pro bono programs, individuals and companies are engaging with the purpose of developing skills and leadership acumen and gaining insights into new markets, but also with the purpose of driving social impact. Purposeful global engagement is a different mindset, and it requires partnership, true partnership, not the type of partnership that's given so much lip service these days. We don't just meet our partners one day, fall in love, and walk hand in hand happily down the street each and every day, except SAP. Partnership is hard. It takes a lot of effort. It takes courage to embrace disagreement and compromise as a necessary part of a partnership. If you've never had a real disagreement with your partner, it probably isn't a true partnership, or you just haven't gotten that far in your relationship yet. It turns out even the great peacemaker Gandhi saw that disagreement and progress go hand in hand. These are really important notions to understand, to accept, and even to value highly. It takes courage to provide what is needed versus what you want to give. It takes courage to embrace fostering process change as a massive contribution to the world. It doesn't have the pretty pictures and the traditional feel-good stories, But together as a global pro bono field of practice, I can see we're changing the traditional feel-good and creating a whole new sphere of contributions that matter. So I leave you today with a special thanks again to SAP and to UPJ for their leadership and sponsorship in bringing us together to discuss how global pro bono can play a significant role in social progress. And with a thanks to those of you who have already invested a great deal in moving the needle on global challenges. But I also leave us today with a challenge to do more. It's not enough to keep doing more of the same. The problems are too big and the needs are too many. And I would challenge all of you to do more, to get other companies to follow your example, to do more to start or scale up your own programs, to engage more purposefully, and to think about what the innovations we can bring to this proven model that will more quickly and more effectively move that needle. Thank you.